Your brand is about so much more. Your brand is about everything that the most important stakeholders in the marketplace say about your company when you're not in the room. And given that you're hardly in the room anymore for most of that buyer's journey, your content and your educational events need to do most of that heavy lifting. And in order to make sure that you're able to attract the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that you, your team, and your company are seen as the definitive experts in the industry on anything and everything having to do with modular, prefabricated data center modules. It is essential that you be super precise, super crisp about who your ideal clients are. Welcome, data center friends across the planet, regardless of whether you're from a data center operator, technology, facilities company, construction, or real estate company. I am Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I want to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest questions that we've heard about, the biggest sales and marketing challenges going on all around the data center ecosystem, regardless of whether you're from an operator like a colocation, hyperscale, edge, modular, wholesale data center related company, or a technology or facilities company that sells to or partners with data center related companies, or a construction or real estate related company, or capital, private equity, venture capital kind of company that works with data center related companies, or perhaps you're from an outsourced sales and marketing related company in and around the data center ecosystem. But either way, if you're trying to grow your influence, if you're trying to grow the role of your team and your company in the growth of the data center ecosystem, you are in the right place, regardless of where you sit on a data center go-to-market team. Perhaps you're in sales, marketing, account management, or customer success, product, channel partnerships, or maybe you're the orchestra conductor, the executive sponsor that brings all of this great stuff together that helps ensure amazing collaboration and alignment across your internal and external team members. So each week, I look at a handful of these really, really big questions. And to make sure that you stay in the loop about new events and educational resources that we help with folks like yourself around these sales and marketing challenges, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter, which comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for today? What are we going to be looking at? First up, we're going to talk about modular data centers, in particular, how a prefabricated modular data center provider can improve its brand, reputation, and trust. Then next, we'll look at how a data center sales rep, account executive, or sales development rep, SDR, AE, can find the correct person. After that, we will turn our attention to how a data center structured cabling company can close more deals. That'll put us at our halftime show, where we'll take a quick commercial break from our sponsor. And after that, we'll tackle 3 additional questions. How a data center real estate broker can address special considerations. How to explain the modular data center mentality to a steel construction company. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, we'll look at how a global colocation data center designer can better plan its sales and marketing. So let's jump right into this week's first question. How can a prefabricated modular data center provider improve its brand, reputation, and trust? So your company provides modular data center related solutions. So we'd consider you somewhere like at the intersection between not quite wholesale, but not quite an operator, but something like the intersection, the Venn diagram overlap of those two spaces. You're basically building modules that look like miniature data centers that get shipped to a location and can either run on a standalone basis or be batch built together in a single facility to be run as modulars within there. And what's interesting is I first became aware of modular data center probably in the early 2010s. A few years after that, I remember being out on a trip in Phoenix and touring the IO data center that's now part of Iron Mountain for several years now. And they were very, very early on in the forefront of having these modules in a large a type of facility. I remember touring the facility and seeing how cool that is. And on the same trip, I got to tour a facility from their sister company, Base Layer, about 20, 30 minutes away from there, that was building modular data centers. But at any rate, this is big, big business. And it continues to be big business because as the appetite for AI and high performance computing is fueling a massive increase in demand. You hear about Jensen Huang predicting this $4 trillion of upgrades that are going to happen over the next 4 years in the data center industry. And you hear about Michael Dell's forecast of a 100-fold increase in data center demand over the next 10 years. Well, certainly one of the ways to deploy capacity faster is modular data centers. So with that in mind, how does a prefab modular data center provider improve its brand reputation and trust? In the world we now live in, where the self-propelled buyer's journey has become the predominant buyer's journey, what this means is most of your best prospects and clients want to do a ton of research on their own before they're open to meeting with someone from your sales team, before they're willing to come down and take the tour. And whether it's taking the tour of the factory where you're building the modules, or whether it's walking through a data center where several of these modules are being deployed. Either way, your best prospects and clients are asking a ton of questions on search and Siri and Alexa and Copilot and Gemini and ChatGPT, and they're watching YouTube videos and they're reading blog posts and comparison guides. They're going to review websites. They're asking questions of their peers like crazy on social media, especially on LinkedIn and Slack channels, and texting their peers for recommendations and things like that. And because of that, now an enormous part of their research and decision-making happens without you being in the room during this process. And this is a big change over the last 10 years. I mean, like I mentioned, when I first started learning about modular data centers, typically about half of a buyer's journey was over before sales contact. About half of the research and decision-making happened before someone reached out to a vendor to schedule a tour or come see the factory or what have you. At the time in the 2010s, the prevailing number from CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, was 56% of this research and decision making was happening before sales contact. That number has now accelerated all the way through to 83%. In other words, 83% of research, comparing options, decision making, evaluating pricing now happens without you being in the room. And the only way that you and your team are going to get back in the room is to reposition and repackage your go-to-market team so that you're no longer seen as vendor sales, so that you're no longer seen as someone that's just focused on a transaction. You need to instead show up as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and in some cases, rising all the way to the level of being seen as a thought leader. In order to do so, you need to be obsessively empathetic about what your most important kinds of clients care about, what their biggest goals are, what their biggest struggles are, where they hang out online and offline, how they get this information. And if this sounds a lot like building buyer personas, doing buyer persona research, that's exactly what it is. So it's incredibly important when it comes to building your brand. Let's put it in this way. 10 years ago, building a brand was largely considered something that a creative director owned. And yeah, for sure, the aesthetics, the trade dress, the colors, the hexadecimal colors, your fonts, your logos, for sure still matter. The aesthetics on your videos, for sure, absolutely still matter. But today, your brand is about so much more. Your brand is about everything that the most important stakeholders in the marketplace say about your company when you're not in the room. And given that you're hardly in the room anymore for most of that buyer's journey, your content and your educational events need to do most of that heavy lifting. And in order to make sure that you're able to attract the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that you, your team, and your company are seen as the definitive experts in the industry on anything and everything having to do with modular, prefabricated data center modules. It is essential that you be super precise, super crisp about who your ideal clients are. So, understanding when we look at the case study section on your website, what are the commonalities that allow you to come up with a well documented ICP, ideal client profile? Where are your clients located geographically? Are they just in your local area, in a region, in a whole state or province, in a country, several countries, a whole continent? What are the geographic parameters where you can sell prefabricated modular data centers? Second, what company size is an ideal client? What's too big? What's too small? At the too small side, where would they have difficulty affording your minimum modular data center? And at the extreme large size, where is it likely that a particular client would prefer a different kind of approach than what you're offering? Or where would it be likely where the jumping through hoops requirements or capital requirements or sales cycle requirements would completely outmatch your company's ability at its current size? So on your ideal client profile, location, we've talked about size, and then are there certain industries that are a better fit than others for your company, certain vertical markets? And that a lot of times can come at the intersection of your location and compliance requirements. Like, for example, if there's certain things, healthcare, financial services, you have these certain government, you have these certain heavily regulated industries where certain kinds of providers have an edge and certain kind of providers can get completely knocked out. So from a product management standpoint, for sure you need to know that. So you've tightly defined your company profile. Within the company, who are the most important stakeholders that determine who are the modular data center providers that get shortlisted? From there, you'll back into identifying a couple of different buyer personas that'll be on the decision committee. And after you've been doing this a while and you have product market fit and go to market fit, you should be able to designate which of those buyer personas matters the most. That becomes your primary buyer persona, which has a role but is not a decision maker, but is still really, really important to educate and build trust with. That could be your secondary buyer persona. And maybe there's an entirely third category of buyer persona that matters. That might be a channel partner or an integrator or something like that. Tertiary buyer persona, or in a different kind of context, different business model, maybe that's your primary buyer persona. Over time, you may also come up with what's known as a negative buyer persona, where when this kind of stakeholder shows up, it's like the kiss of death. They completely grind your sales process, the buyer's journey, to a halt, because something that they do innately with their kind of job role, their function, their belief system, whatever it is really the antithesis of a company that would invest in prefabricated modular data centers. So when it comes to growing the brand reputation and growing the trust for a company that's in the business of modular data centers, be super clear about who the company is and who the stakeholders are. And then make it a really, really high priority for your client-facing team members to be seen as the ultimate educators, the ultimate subject matter experts, the ultimate advisors of anything and everything having to do with modular data centers at the intersection of this kind of company and what it is that you do. From a tactical perspective, it's content, it's educational events, it's an amazing blog, it's research reports, it's downloadable planning guides, it's podcasts, it's videos. Maybe it's a modular data center academy or a modular data center university or something like that. That's on-demand training, live training, perhaps training that's in person. Remember, webinars and live streams, you can do offline versions of these as well. You take the same content, you take the same approach. And as long as your prospects and clients are within a half hour to an hour drive of your location, or you could do a roadshow version of this, you invite anywhere from a couple dozen to a few hundred together, and you have these lunch and learns or breakfast seminars or symposia or whatever works best that helps to position your team as the experts and the teachers on this particular topic. And then you can be super deliberate about who you invite in the first place. Those events, by the way, if you have a facility where you can host your own events, even with very small numbers, they can be extremely low budget and extremely worthwhile. Because if you think about, like, if you have a classroom or a conference room or something that can accommodate 20 people, and you're able to get 3 or 4 stakeholders from 5 or 6 different accounts on your target account list to come do a lunch and learn or come do a breakfast seminar, and they spend a half hour, 45 minutes learning from your CEO or CTO or whatever about some topics that are incredibly top of mind for them. They have 15, 20 minutes when they first arrive to network with each other and have some breakfast or have some lunch. Afterwards, you take them, you open it up for Q&A, and you take them on a tour around your facility, and you point out all the amazing things that you can do with your modular data centers that nobody else in the industry can match. You'd be amazed at that simple playbook that you can run for, in the US, a couple $1,000s easily over and over and over again, or your local currency equivalent, how amazingly effective that can be if you're getting the right people from your team and the right kinds of prospects and potential clients in the room. So those are some pretty simple things, but very important, very powerful, very effective ways for a modular data center business to improve its brand reputation and improve the trust that it has in the marketplace. Next question up. How does a data center sales rep, how does a data center sales professional find the right person, find the correct person? So you're either a sales development rep, an SDR, or a BDR, business development rep, or an account executive, something like that, in a sales related role in and around the data center industry. I don't really know your business model context, whether you're from an operator, a technology or facilities company, or a construction or real estate company, or something related to outsourced sales and marketing, but something related to the data center, digital infrastructure ecosystem, and you're in sales and you're struggling to find the correct person. The way I would approach this is, if your company is brand new, you have a completely different set of challenges to get your company to product market fit. Product market fit is the degree to which you know exactly who your ideal clients are, the exact products and services that they purchase from your company, the price points that they buy those at, the frequency or the durations that they engage with you on that sales cycle length, and being able to answer the basic questions around unit economics, like average client lifetime value, average cost of client acquisition, average sales cycle length, profitability. Once you have the answers to those questions and your company has hit the maturity stage where you have product market fit, the next step up is go to market fit. This is where you move beyond founder-led sales. You're hiring your first sales team, and you're trying to make sure that as you add capital to your growth plans, that the wheels don't fall off of your business, metaphorically, that you're able to continue to grow and scale profitably. And for most companies in and around the data center industry, what that usually means is not only that you're able to profitably close deals, but you're able to get those clients the outcome that you promised them in the first place, that they're able to have a great experience with onboarding, initial value, intended value, extended value, the basic foundational stuff that account managers, that customer AMs, customer success managers, CSMs work on all of the time, to be able to have delighted clients that help fuel positive word of mouth and are a pleasure to work with, and that are very open to overtures for expansion of the relationship, doing more with them, customer marketing, things along those lines. So that's getting to go-to-market fit. So let's go with the idea that you're on a sales team of an established business that's way past the product market fit stage and way past the go-to-market fit stage. So with that in mind, there should be some case studies, there should be some reviews of the kinds of clients that you've done best with. As part of sales onboarding, probably as part of even sales hiring, you should be studying those. If they're videos, watching them, if they're web pages, reading them, if they're PDFs, downloading and reading them, what have you, and look for the common threads, because that helps you to document your ICP. That helps you to figure your ideal client profile. That helps you to figure out your most important and second most important buyer personas. And by being able to look at your most successful clients and figuring out the people that were involved pre-sales and post-sales, it helps you to understand who should be your primary, your most important buyer persona, and what kind of job role, what kind of job function, what kind of stakeholder is your second most important buyer persona. And perhaps there's a category of a third kind of person as well that wraps into this decision-making committee. So that gives you a lot of insight. So once you know that, you'll have your ideal client profile documented geographically, company size, business model type of stuff. From there, you should be able to go build a target account list to fuel what's often known as account-based marketing, ABM. This is a list of anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred, sometimes even a few thousand kind of ideal clients that your company would love to be doing business with. And that should focus a lot of your business development, of your prospecting and lead generation and lead nurturing, sales development kind of efforts, is that list of defined couple dozen, couple hundred, couple thousand companies. And it's up to your company to decide how you're going to divvy that up. You really can one AE or SDR really handle prospecting thousands of companies, or is a couple hundred or a couple dozen at a time more realistic? I can't answer that question for you because it depends on your business model and your average deal size and your sales cycle length and the strength of the company's brand in the marketplace. But yeah, those are some of the key considerations. So the right person, the correct person, is not only subjective, it varies depending on what it is that your company does and your value proposition for that particular company. But if you know the patterns historically where your company has been most successful, and you know the kinds of stakeholders at those companies that have been involved, you're looking to replicate and clone that kind of success. So that makes it way easier to know who that correct person is. But just a heads up, it's rarely, very, very rarely, a single correct person anymore. It's usually a collection of correct people that sit on this decision committee. Because if you dig deeper into most of your client success, it is very unusual for any large considered sales, large considered purchases for just the decision maker to have been involved in that process. So go back and look among those companies that are sitting on your case studies page where you've been most successful with. Go back and do some research in your CRM, your customer relationship management system, and see who was involved in that research and decision-making process and that planning process, both on a pre-sales and on a post-sales basis. And by involved, it isn't just people necessarily that sat in on the meetings. Certainly that would give them higher priority, but look and see in those same companies who was downloading content, who was subscribed to newsletters, who was attending webinars, who stopped by your booth at a conference, who came to your lunch and learn, who had a sales meeting 6 months or a year ago that doesn't seem like it's connected, but oh, interesting. Common first degree connections between that person and one of the people on the decision committee. So you roll this together and you start to get an idea of like mapping a particular account. And what mapping a particular account means is kind of like in your mind, and even there's tools that allow you to do this visually. You're kind of building like an org chart, an organizational chart of how those roles all interact with each other when it comes to what your company does in the data center ecosystem. And with that in mind, as you go about investing in creating great thought leadership content and great educational events that educate and build trust, your goal should be to get as many people as possible from that decision committee attending, consuming that content, participating, and walking away feeling like your client-facing team are the smartest dudes on the face of the earth when it comes to your sector, your segment within the data center industry, providing amazing value so that your prospects and clients want to spend time with members of your sales team, as opposed to you having to chase and beg and control and manipulate to get their attention. When you have completely flipped the switch so that your prospects and clients see your sales team as consultants and experts that feel like they have a Big Four vibe, that feels like every interaction is so incredibly valuable. It feels like they're talking with an enterprise consultant who works for like PwC or EY or KPMG or Deloitte or Accenture or Kyndryl or something like that. When you have successfully navigated that, game changer for how you're able to build relationships that educate and build trust and grow trust with key stakeholders on the decision committee. And you can do other subtle positioning things as well. I've been suggesting for quite some time that sales leaders, chief revenue officers, CEOs evaluate the job titles, at least the public facing job titles with members on your sales team. Like, what's the job title that's in your LinkedIn email signature, that's in your on your LinkedIn profile? What's your job title? What's the job title that's in your email signature? What's the job title that's on your business card? Surely you can come up with a better way of positioning your sales team's unique expertise that they provide to clients than just calling someone a sales rep or account executive or business development rep or something like that. Because when you do that, either positively or negatively, it for sure sends a message to your prospects and clients. But when it comes to finding the correct person, it varies a lot on your business model. Your case studies should have a follow the yellow brick road moment that allows you to build your ideal client profile, build out a target account list for account-based marketing that drives all of your investments around content and educational events. And the cool part, you'll know this is working because someone registers for your upcoming webinar or your breakfast seminar or downloads your planning guide or research report or something like that on this particular topic. And a few minutes later, from your basic email marketing automation system that's existed for the better part of now 20 years, they get a message back that says, "Hey, Bob, who else should read this? Who else should attend this? Who else should watch this? Hey, Bob, thanks so much for signing up for our webinars. Thanks so much for downloading our planning guide. But we know when it comes to tackling this challenge, it takes a village. Typically, this is multidisciplinary and involves people from these 4, 5, 6 different job functions. So with that in mind, is there anyone else on your team who would benefit from reading this, watching this, attending this? If so, hit the forward button on your email, write a line or two about why this matters, and feel free to use this as an alignment tool with some of the other key people on your team. You'd be shocked how often this simple thing causes you to knock down the first couple dominoes in the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And you'll know this is working because whoever is sitting and getting the conversion notices, download notices, whatever it is coming from HubSpot, email marketing, whatever you're doing, you start to see 4, 5, 6 people from the same company converting on the landing page, registering and downloading within a period of a few minutes or a couple of hours. And you're like, holy crap, it's working. They're passing our stuff around. They're talking about us. Amazing. And sooner or later, you'll have at least 1 or 2 of those people that emerge as the internal champion, and they'll help you start to connect the dots with some of the other people there. But at the absolute minimum, you're getting them talking about what you do in a common language, in a common framework. And you'll know this is working well when obviously you see several people from the same company converting, but you go into the first meeting with that company with 4, 5, 6 people from that same company, and they are quoting your methodology. They're quoting your experts and how they navigated all the other options that are in front of them. So not only does this allow you to dominate the 28 touch points throughout the buyer's journey, when you do this effectively, not only are you guaranteed to stay on the short list, but your content and your events may start to gradually eliminate competitors from the consideration set. How cool is that? Before you get to the first conversation, not only have you accomplished amazing levels of education and trust building, but you've knocked out competitors because they're spending so much time with your company's experts that you're running circles around any other options that they are considering in this space. So the question was, how can a data center sales rep find the correct person? Set up a culture within your company that makes what I just described the priority for anything and everything having to do with client growth, new account development, revenue growth going forward. Next question up is, how does a data center structured cabling company close more deals? How does a company that sells structured cabling in and around data centers close more deals? So there's a couple things to lean into. Cabling companies kind of sit at the intersection of low voltage and telecommunications and network infrastructure. And because of that, there's different kinds of stakeholders in and around the data center ecosystem that you likely want to be building mutually beneficial relationships with over time. Big cabling jobs often happen around the same time as commissioning following construction. So there's two categories of companies to build relationships with. The end results of cabling that end up in switches and routers, that rolls up into a network engineer, a system engineer, a network operations center. Companies that provide racks and cabinets. That's where the cabling ultimately will end up landing when it gets plugged into a switch or a router and it's going on risers and all this other stuff within the data center ecosystem. So yeah, there's a lot of great, if you were thinking about building an event, hosting events, hosting a podcast, there's a lot of great ecosystem partners that you could have to grow a structured cabling business and educate and build trust that would allow you to close sales faster. But I would also caution to tell you that being a low voltage cabling company is a very mature industry. Early on in my career, I had an IT services, IT consulting business, what would be considered an MSP today. And I had multiple low voltage cabling companies that we worked with on a regular basis. And I can tell you without a doubt that this is a very mature industry. So if you're not constantly looking at what is coming next and figuring out a way to differentiate in your product and services delivery, and now even more important than that, differentiating in the awareness and the consideration stages of the buyer's journey, it is really easy to get commoditized, which means that you're forced to compete on price. And that's a crappy way to grow a business. So we want to make sure that you avoid that. So with that in mind, there's a couple strategies that I would advise someone who is thinking about, like at a chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer level, what it takes to grow sales and close deals more rapidly around structured cabling. For starters, get very deliberate about the kinds of clients that you work with and make sure this is documented in your ideal client profile, your ICP, that everyone on your go-to-market team has access to across marketing, sales, your account managers, your product team, your channel partnerships team, your executive leadership team, really, really specific about where you've been historically most successful. So this should include a geographic component. It should include a company size, what's big enough that they can afford your minimums, but not so large that they're likely to have a crazy long sales process or absurd amount of hoops or crazy financing or something they want you to jump through, or regulatory requirements that you can't meet, or insurance requirements or something like that. So where they're located, company size, and then are there any industries, vertical markets where you do really well? And conversely, on any of these factors, are there things that are negatives where you could just get knocked out prematurely because you're not able to check a certain box that companies that are just like that always tend to have in common? So from the ideal client profile, next, you'll be able to build a target account list. From there, you should be able to define and prioritize your buyer personas, do the buyer persona research, and understand the biggest goals and challenges that a data center related stakeholder has throughout their research and decision-making process, what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve, what are the things that they're struggling with the most, their biggest challenges, their biggest stressors, what are the things that when they mess up could potentially derail their career if it's that bad, what are the things that cause them to have to work nights and weekends when that's not their normal time when they work, what are the things that interfere with their time off with friends, family, loved ones, what are the things that can mess up the chance for them to have some well-deserved time off or vacation to recharge, but something about structured cabling being screwed up interferes with that. All of these things together, the amalgamation, the summation of all of this together helps you to have a really crisp, tight, empathetic buyer persona approach to all of your content and educational events. That alone will help you close more deals faster because you'll understand exactly who they are. You've mapped the buyer's journey so you understand the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. You're making a concerted effort to show up in as many of those 28 touch points as possible so that they see your client-facing team as the be-all, end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with structured cabling in their region and their local market at the intersection of what they do. You're providing so much value that they actually want to spend time with members of your sales team, as opposed to your sales team having to beg, borrow, cajole, manipulate, whatever, to get sales appointments booked, because they get a lot of value from spending time with members of your sales team. They see them more as like free consulting. That's so good. It feels like they're talking to a big four consultant. And then, like, from a tactical perspective, not only saturating those 28 touch points, so there's no reason for them to look elsewhere for educational resources, but anticipating what a particular buyer persona in this kind of company wants to learn at step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way through step 28. You're able to proactively put the right information in front of them, because you know, for someone like this particular stakeholder in this kind of company at this particular step, you know exactly what they're going to want to do next. Massive, massive sales cycle acceleration by being able to do this. From a tactical campaign standpoint, yeah, you need great, amazing content. Video-based content, image-based, graphical content, text-based content, on-demand content, live virtual events like webinars and live streams, live offline events, all of the above, and on all the priorities will get dialed in based on your buyer persona's preferences and what they need to learn to do their job better. So in addition to the content, in addition to the events, you need really good landing pages and conversion paths, you need good confirmation pages, good email workflow nurturing. Webinars and email marketing alone can make a really, really big difference in sales cycle acceleration. And for sure, figure out a way to get your sales team members involved in some way, shape, or form with facilitating, moderating these events, helping to produce these events. However, they really actually do have to be educating, because that builds trust. Showing up and rapidly trying to act like a car salesperson and pushing someone to close prematurely, that does the opposite of build trust. So there's definitely a cultural makeover that needs to happen in a lot of companies to execute this kind of playbook well. But if you're serious as a structured cabling company about closing more of the right deals with the right kinds of clients and the right kinds of context, it's high time for a makeover so that members of your go-to-market team, especially members of your sales team, are showing up in such a way that your prospects and clients want to spend time with them, as opposed to the other way around. So that brings us to the halfway mark for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. Next question up that I'll be looking at this week is, how does a data center real estate broker address special considerations? How does a DCRE, data center real estate broker, address special considerations? I think first and foremost that you need to know what these special considerations are. So depending on how experienced you are and how experienced your team is, you likely have internal resources that are documenting some or all of these special considerations, like an internal wiki, knowledge base, some kind of tool, some kind of app that you use internally to cross-train different members of your team on what these special considerations are. Once you know all of those, my advice would be to proactively build educational assets and events that proactively answer these and address these with your prospects and clients. So to the extent that you've cataloged the 20 most frequently heard special considerations among your clients, among your tenants in data center real estate. I would make those the first 20 YouTube videos, the first 20 blogs, the first 20 email sequence templates that you create that proactively address those questions. And I'd start with a video process with you, one of your subject matter experts or one or more of your subject matter experts, where you say, on the subject line, on the headline, what the special consideration is. We get this question a lot. And in case you're thinking of this, this is how we typically would advise our clients to proceed. And then you spend a couple of minutes and explain how you would approach this. Again, start ideally in video, because from a video shoot, let's say there's 20 of these considerations, you could probably book a 2-hour video shoot with one or more subject matter experts from your company, record these, and then they're done until a couple of weeks later when all the stuff has been post-produced. And by post-produced, your marketing, your media team, your content team will oversee doing the post-production, breaking them up into smaller videos, into shorts, into carousels, into PDFs, into newsletters, all kinds of social posts, into downloadable ebooks, a collection, all that great stuff. And then you'll have an amazing way to get that out in front proactively in front of your prospects and clients, so that these special considerations don't just come up at the last minute because you've proactively addressed each of these, because for this kind of client, for this kind of tenant, in this kind of facility, with this size building, on this kind of land, in this kind of location, what those special considerations are. And because of that, there's no reason to wait until the client or the tenant brings them up at the later stages of the cycle, because you can score an amazing amount of brand building halo, accumulate a massive amount of trust by proactively anticipating what these considerations are going to be for this kind of buyer persona and this kind of company, and proactively drip this out to them. So not only are your brokers answering the questions that this buyer persona would have, but you're proactively providing the information that they ought to be asking about, but haven't articulated quite yet. That ensures that your company stays on the short list in many cases. And this approach ensures that your company dominates the short list, because you're in on several of these 28 touch points between complete stranger and new client, new tenant. And because of that, you're actually taking away the opportunity for them to go spend time with your competition, because they're getting so much value. They're learning so much from hanging out with your team that all of a sudden now they want to hang out with your brokers, your experts, as opposed to going to seeking out other alternatives. And when that happens, not only are you guaranteed to be on the short list, but in many cases, you start to knock out weaker competitors along the way. So when they get to being in market, so when they get to the point that they're ready to start looking at the lease and looking at something more concrete, you've already done an enormous amount of education and trust building that ensures that you're really, really solidly in there in the consideration set. And in unusual circumstances, but it does happen, there can be cases where you do such an amazing job of showing up as the be-all end-all expert on data center real estate that your content and your events experiences knock out all of the competitive options. And by the time you get in there, they're just about ready to sign. So yeah, that's how I would approach these special considerations. And I would be constantly looking to research and catalog new special considerations, so you understand the dynamics, the changing trends in your marketplace, which right now in real estate has to do with availability, has to do with community activists blocking developers from moving forward, has to do with grid power availability, saturation. It's a host of factors that are coming up. There's historically low vacancy rates in a lot of the marketplaces, and all the big names in the space like JLL and CBRE and stuff put out amazing thought leadership research on what's actually going on in the marketplace. They know exactly what these special considerations are, and they make it a point of letting the marketplace know that they have this unique expertise and insight around there. You don't necessarily have to have marketing, content, thought leadership budgets as big as some of the giants in the space to be successful. But even as a relatively small company, you can adopt a lot of the same mindset to kind of democratize this whole process and make sure that you and your client-facing team members, your brokers, whoever is involved in this sales capacity with potential clients, with potential tenants is being seen. So you're showing up in the right with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see you and your team members as the ultimate experts on anything and everything having to do with data center real estate and the special considerations in your marketplace. Next question up. How do we explain the modular data center mentality to a steel construction company? How do we explain modular data centers and the mentality behind modular data centers to a steel construction company? Wow, that is a really specific question. So, the way I would approach this is get really dialed into who these steel construction companies are. Where are they located? How big or how small are they? And do they have certain specializations within construction? Like, for example, when you go to their LinkedIn company pages and you look at that second About tab and you see how they describe themselves and you look at the string of keywords that's on that lower tab, what do they do to let you know how they think of themselves? So LinkedIn company page, the About tab, the keywords that are there, and of course the same thing on their website. What shows up above the fold on the homepage, what shows up in the About page on their website, can be really, really telling to how they think of themselves. From there, when you start to see commonalities among all of these steel construction companies that you're looking at, you'll be able to come up with an ideal client profile. You'll be able to come up with an understanding of who the most important stakeholders are at these steel construction companies, who's the most important kind of stakeholder that you need to educate and build trust with, who's the second most important kind of stakeholder at these steel construction companies that you need to educate and build trust with. And this is really just another kind of go-to-market playbook, is figuring out how you're going to educate and build trust with these folks. Is it going to be through a great blog article that you publish once or twice a week? Are you going to publish these amazing YouTube videos? Is there going to be a podcast on steel construction in the data center industry or something like that? Are you going to have a great webinar series? Are you going to have offline breakfast seminars or symposiums or lunch and learns or something like that? Or is it all of the above? But you need to get really dialed into, in their own words, what these steel construction companies see as their biggest goals are when they're working in and around digital infrastructure, when they're working in and around the data center industry. What are their biggest stressors? What are their biggest frustrations? What are their biggest challenges? In their own words, not what you think those words might be, but what their own words actually are. So a head of construction for a steel construction company, for a smaller company, maybe it's a CEO or COO. Again, you're going to figure out what the job roles are depending on how big or small these companies are. That's part of the exploration process to getting you to the point that you have success and product market fit and case studies and all that stuff. But understand who the companies are. That'll help you build your target account list. Understand who the stakeholders are that are getting involved in these pre-planning, pre-construction kind of conversations, and look to build relationships with them so they see you as the be-all end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with modular data centers at the intersection of steel construction for the digital infrastructure industry. So explaining it is largely coming down to understanding what are their biggest questions, what are their biggest challenges, and in order of priority, tackling those one at a time. You can tackle it through blogs, you can tackle it through YouTube videos, you can tackle it through a podcast, you can tackle it through a webinar. You can do all of the above and then repurpose it and use outbound. You can use LinkedIn. You can use a variety of different tactics to educate and build trust with these really important stakeholders at these steel construction companies. But that's how I would approach explaining modular data centers to steel construction companies. Be aware of the journey that they're going to go through. Understand that just like most in this space, there'll be 25 or 30, 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And it's not enough to just show up once. You need to show up repeatedly over and over and over again and continuing to add value by understanding what they need to figure out to grow their career, to grow their team's impact, to grow their company's impact, for them to grow their data center digital infrastructure related business by adopting this modular data center mindset. And early on, they're probably not looking for modular data centers. That's probably more a consideration stage to decision stage kind of topic research, keyword kind of situation. Early on, there's probably in the awareness stage of the buyer's journey, there's probably some things that lead to that. but that's probably not necessarily the first thing that they were looking for when they first started out on this journey. And the only way that you're going to know those topics is by interviewing the key people at these companies, ideally face to face. Second best would be like Zoom interviews or calls. If you can't get access to any of that, at least define the ideal client profile and go and dig up 10 or 20 LinkedIn profiles, names of people, and study how they describe themselves. Study the kind of content that they share. Take the names and company names of those same people and put them in a Google search and see what else comes up. Are there trade journals and other people's blogs and news releases that they've been quoted in? Have they spoken at industry conferences where you can watch a YouTube video to not only get the topics and the ideas in their own words, but observe the body language? All of these can provide an amazing set of customer insight research for you to back into documenting these buyer personas and providing amazingly impactful educational content and events that allow you to educate and build trust with key stakeholders in these steel construction companies that want to do a lot more in the digital infrastructure space. And you think your modular data center solution should be a big part of this, but you need to be able to explain this in a way that really resonates with them. So that is how I would approach explaining modular data center mentality to steel construction companies. Okay, that brings us to question number 6, our final question that I will be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. This is about design. I guess design and build. Perhaps it's just the design part. Maybe it's just the architecture, engineering kind of part here. But how does a global colocation data center designer better plan sales and marketing? How does a global designer that specializes in colocation data centers better plan its sales and marketing? Global is a really interesting word when it comes to sales and marketing. The reason that global is so important is it's extremely unusual that a single sales and marketing playbook is going to work in a lot of different regions around the globe without some customization and personalization. So first and foremost, when it comes to global, we need to redefine, is it global? Is it every corner of the earth? Or is it global with some guardrails like the US, UK, Australia, Poland, Sweden, Norway, South Africa, whatever. So like define global. What does global mean to your company? This will help you document your ICP, your ideal client profile. What does global actually mean to your company? Second, what company sizes are a really good fit for your colocation data center design services? Is it all companies? Or are there some companies that are too big that are almost certainly going to want a different kind of design company or do these things in-house? Or are there companies that are so small that they can't afford your minimums? So when it comes to global colocation data center design services, first we need to define what global means in terms of location. Next, we need to define the company sizes that could be a really good client for your company, because more than likely there are some clients that are too big and there's almost certainly going to be some that are too small. And then third, are there certain industries, certain kinds of colocation facilities that are a better fit than others? So what do we mean by industries or business models that are a better fit than others when it comes to designing colocation data centers? Well, depending on where the locations are, there's certain kind of governmental data centers, healthcare related data centers, financial services related data centers that have regulatory requirements. Do you have expertise around that or don't you? May not be as big of an issue on design, but it for sure becomes an issue when you get into the commissioning. So where have you been successful? Where have you hit a roadblock? Are you really good at manufacturing companies and really good in telecommunications companies, but haven't had a lot of traction elsewhere? That's also really important to document in your ideal client profile, because that will help to dial in, that will help you to get a lot more specific about your sales and marketing approach. For sure, it will help as your sales ops, as your sales development reps, as you put together your target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe at the absolute most a few thousand colocation data centers that could be a potential client for your design services. That'll inform your whole account-based marketing, target account list kind of approach. And that will also inform the kind of stakeholders that you need to educate and build trust with, your buyer personas. And it will help you prioritize the buyer personas, who's on the committee, who's on the decision committee, and what kind of roles do each of those parties have. Once you have the ideal client profile defined, once you have the buyer personas, that's your segmentation strategy, you'll go out and you do your research and interview people either face-to-face or on Zoom, or at the minimum, look at their LinkedIn profiles and what comes back when you search up their names and their company names for what else you can find about how they describe themselves, what they talk about, what's top of mind for their biggest career goals, their team's goals, their company's goals, what frustrates them the most, what are their biggest challenges, what are their biggest stressors, what are their biggest stressors. That is incredibly important for your go-to-market playbook, for your sales and marketing plan, for your content approach, for your educational events approach. And one caveat with all of this is we now live in a world where the self-propelled buyer's journey is the predominant buyer's journey, meaning people are doing so much research on their own before they get to you that now most of the time when you meet a new prospect or a potential client, most of their research and decision making is already over. So if you got in early and you were able to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the other different options that are in front of them for colocation data center design services, that's fantastic. Think about like 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision throughout the awareness and consideration and decision stages of the buyer's journey. To the extent that you have these amazing educational resources and events where you're able to show up in the right places at the right time with the right people and in the right context, so they see your team members as the be-all end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with co-location data center design. Fantastic. And nearly all cases, when you do this well, you're guaranteed to be on the short list. In some cases, when you do this exceptionally well, your content and your educational events start to gradually eliminate competition because they start to come to the multiple stakeholders that are consuming your content and educational events are starting to come to the conclusion that some of the other people that they thought about aren't even worthy of being on the short list. So many times when you do this so exceptionally well, by the time you get to that first conversation, you've done such an amazing job with the indoctrination and educating and building trust that they're quoting your internal experts. They've used your methodology that you've introduced to them to frame and evaluate and compare all the other options that are in front of them. And this alone has an amazing impact. This is also part of the reason why your sales team members, your account executives, your sales development reps need to be prepared to come in much earlier on in the buyer's journey than they ever have historically in the past in their careers, so that they can participate as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and in some cases, even rising up to the level of thought leaders. Game-changing impact when your prospects for co-location design services see members of your sales team as subject matter experts and consultants and trusted advisors, as opposed to just a vendor rep. Because when that happens the right way, your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your team, as opposed to members of your team having to chase them and beg for attention all the time. And along the same lines, members of your marketing team will probably look a lot more like a media and events company, and they'll be prepared to go much deeper into the buyer's journey, sitting side by side on the same team with the SDRs and the AEs, much deeper into the journey than they ever have in the past. There also may be multiple members of the rest of your go-to-market team, account managers, customer success managers, product managers, channel partnerships managers, that make a ton of sense to have involved in some way, shape, or form in creating, hosting, facilitating these tremendously impactful educational events experiences for potential buyers of co-location data center design services. And even the junior members of your team that are relatively new to the industry can many times participate and have an impact, because even though they clearly won't be the thought leaders, they can still be great tour guides and great concierges of your internal resources that are more seasoned and more expert with all of this. So when you change the context so that your prospects and clients now see you as colocation design academy or colocation design university or whatever, the colocation design, whatever it is, it completely changes the way that they look at your company. And this is the culture going forward that's going to make a company like yours way, way more differentiated and way more successful in aligning with the way that modern human beings actually research and make these purchase decisions. So many companies, especially in the construction and real estate related segment of the digital infrastructure space, are leaning on a sales and marketing playbook from the 2010s. It's insane. It's as if some of the people on these teams are expecting a comeback, a resurgence, a renaissance of printed phone books, printed trade publications, fax machines, and dial-up modems. For the Gen Zers that are watching this, you're probably wondering, what the heck is Joshua Feinberg talking about? What is a fax machine? What's a dial-up modem? You can look it up on YouTube. But at any rate, it's super important to understand these customer insights, to understand your buyer personas, to understand how they research and make their purchase decisions. And yeah, there are extreme edge cases in the extreme minority of these buyer's journeys where people haven't changed much. But like McKinsey, for example, found that 70 to 80% of B2B decision makers now prefer a digital journey. So if you think that all of your prospects and clients are a digitally resistant 80-year-old CEO who barely uses a smartphone, who still has an old-fashioned secretary that prints out their emails and reads it to them, and takes their phone messages on a pink while you were out thing and passes around memos in an inner office envelope with the little string that wrapped around the circle fasteners that were on there. Like, if they really believe this is the case, go spend more time with your clients. I can assure you that if there are any digitally resistant stakeholders on the decision committee, when that person retires, there's not going to be another digitally resistant stakeholder that's going to take over their place on the decision committee. Most of the baby boomers that I hang around with are even very digitally savvy and spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and spend a lot of time going on webinars and listening to podcasts and watching videos. So if the majority of your decision committees are comprised of Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zs, it's incredibly important to show up how they want you to show up where they actually are, not where you'd like them to be in the final 5 or 10% of the decision-making process, but where they actually are today. Because if you can show up where they actually are today, you can have a massive impact on how they evaluate all of the alternatives that are in front of them. If you don't show up, someone else is going to have a massive impact on how they evaluate the competitive options that are in front of them. And I can assure you that if a competitor of yours shows up and you're not present, the competitor is going to stack the decks on the decision criteria in that company's favor. So if you want to be the one that is involved in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, that is seen as the definitive experts, teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with colocation, data center, design services, going forward, your sales and marketing playbook should look a lot more like a media company that is built to provide amazing educational resources that educate and build trust with your most important buyer personas in the most important kind of companies that matter most to your company's growth as a company that provides global colocation, data center, design services. And needless to say, if you're providing this in multiple countries, obviously you're going to need to provide these in localized versions. If most people in a particular company, in a particular country, speak a different language than English, for sure, your sales team needs to be bilingual. Your marketing assets, your events need to be, presented in the language and with the cultural localization and cultural familiarity that lands and resonates with that particular market. But at the end of the day, it's all about educating and building trust. And if you're going to do this in more than one global market, you're more than likely going to need to customize and localize that. This isn't anything new. For early on in my career, back when I was doing contract work for Microsoft Small Business Channel Partner Program, there was localizations in a dozen different languages because what was being built out of the tools and resources and blogs and downloads and all that stuff out of Redmond, Washington, sure, resonated with people, with channel partners in the US and in Canada, and to a certain extent in the UK and Australia, but in other places for sure, it needed language translation. So if your company is truly global and you're truly doing sales and marketing in these regions, you may start with a US first approach, but at the end of the day, these are all investments in growth. But get the strategy right, get the mindset right, get the cultural right, so that your company is seen as the be-all, end-all expert in anything and everything having to do with global colocation data center design. So that brings us to the final question that I'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming events and educational resources just like this, make sure that you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that's delivered each week to your email inbox on Sundays. And you can do so directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Until next time, I'm Joshua Feinberg, and I wish you great success in growing your role, your team's influence, and your company's role in the tremendous growth opportunity that we're all enjoying now in the data center marketplace, in the digital infrastructure industry. See you next week. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.